Let me ask you a question. What are things a human being needs to experience in their life in order to grow and change? What do we, as people, need to go through? While the answers to this question differ widely from person to person, I think the best answer I've seen comes from my favorite video game of all time, Until Then. Until Then, created by Nicole Klein-Nolud and Polychroma Games, is a 2D story game that takes place in the Philippines. It follows a teenage boy by the name of Mark Borja as he navigates through life, meeting new people, experiencing new things, and learning to play the piano in order to cope with the death of his mother. All the while, the universe continuously resets and falls apart. It's one of the most heartfelt, gut-wrenching games I've ever played in my life, with an ending that still makes me cry every time I watch it. While the game does have a gorgeous art style, amazing music, and an interesting story, what I feel like Until Then does the best in is their characters. Not only is almost every character in the game endearing and charming in their own way, but the main cast all cover a different aspect of the human experience. Despite Until Then's sci-fi and supernatural themes, it's the most human game I've ever played. The two main characters, Mark Borja and Nicole Laksamana, through the loss of their loved ones, represent a person's grief, guilt, regret, and the need to let go, along with finding love and solace within another person. Mark's best friend, Kathy Portillo, represents the fear of abandonment, the need for trust, and the struggle to find your passions. There are characters who represent the fear of expectations, the desire to move forward, loneliness, sacrifice, abuse, human understanding, and laziness. A lot of laziness. Now, while I do want to talk about a lot of these things later down the line, the human experience that I wanted to focus on today is failure. And I believe a character that represents human failure more than anyone is Until Then's Ridel Gonzales. Not only in the way he fails, but how he reacts to that failure. Today, I want to talk about Ridel, going through his history, character, and two biggest failures in the story to show why he is one of the best, most relatable portrayals of failure I've ever seen. Before we dive into his history, we should first answer the question, who is Ridel? Ridel Gonzales is the third best friend of Mark Borja and Catherine Portillo, and both the youngest and tallest in the trio. Together, they make up the MCR group. Not that MCR. He's a hipster with a passion for filmmaking and photography, and despite having way less screen time than Mark and Kathy, Ridel is still a major character within Acts 1 and 2, with a lot more depth and nuance than a lot of people seem to realize. Within Act 1, we first meet Ridel and Kathy at Mark's school, and from the jump, we can see how close the three friends are with each other. The way they give each other shit for their love interests is super realistic. This one scene sets up their dynamics perfectly. As the three friends talk, it's here that we first learn about Ridel's hobby for photography. We can even see some of his professional photos later on. It's then revealed that Ridel gained the funding to direct a short film, a project that he's quite secretive of, assuring his two friends that they'll all see it together once it finishes production. Later on, it's shown that Ridel is no longer classmates with Mark and Kathy due to the school shuffling up the classes for the year. Because of both the shuffle and the short film, when Mark and Kathy meet up later on, Ridel is unable to be there because of exams, with his presence being missed by the two friends. This absence, while small right now, becomes much bigger later down the line. Because of his short film, Ridel begins to move away from Mark and Kathy. It starts off small, with him not texting in their group chat, but his absence truly becomes present when the group goes to the fair, a day that Kathy planned as a final hangout for the trio before Ridel went off to shoot his short film. As soon as he arrives, he walks right past his friends while he talks to his producers on the phone, and throughout the night, it's clear that all he can think about is his film. He confuses Kathy's words with questions about his movie, he talks about how it's his big day, and something that definitely doesn't sit right is how he tells Mark that they need to get this fair day over with, like it's something he's being forced to go to. Despite this being the last time he sees his friends for a year, it's all in the back of his head, as the only thing he can think about is his movie. After he finally departs for his short film, Ridel is then absent for almost the entirety of the first act, with him not even texting his friends on Christmas. What makes it even worse is that it's clear that Ridel's been present on social media, with him responding to every comment under his post an hour ago. It almost comes across as personal that he's not responding to his friends. His absence throughout the first act is a key part of Mark and Kathy's relationship, as while the two continue spending time together, they continue to express how much they miss him. But what I find truly heartwarming is that the two don't resent him for leaving. They're happy that their friend is thriving, and understand that this short film is a huge opportunity for him. They know that trying to hold him back wouldn't be right, and while the two do miss him, they both continue to live their lives. Mark's grown a deep bond with Nicole, and continues to improve at his piano playing, while Kathy's developed a relationship with a girl by the name of Sophia Rubio, and is working hard to try and find her own passions. Ridel then isn't seen until the end of the first act, after Kathy's unfortunate death at their high school prom. After her funeral, Mark and Ridel sit down in a private theater and watch what Ridel had created, the piece that he put all of his time, effort, and passion into. And as Ridel tells Mark that he wishes Kathy could have seen it, all Mark could say was that Ridel wasn't even there. Despite knowing how big of an opportunity this short film was to Ridel, Mark calls him out on how absent he was. He questions why Ridel even wanted to make the short film in the first place, something that he's been secretive about since the start, to which Ridel says that it was made for them, Mark and Kathy. This answer does nothing to calm Mark down. He calls Ridel out for not even wishing him and Kathy a Merry Christmas. Not having a response to this, Ridel then shifts the blame to Mark, telling him that he was busy too, to which Mark says that at least he was around. And after hearing this, Ridel then asks Mark, was it enough? The question causes Mark to freeze, and tells Ridel that no, it wasn't. None of it was. And after hearing this, Ridel's anger subsides too, telling Mark that he was right and that he was sorry. And while I have talked about this scene before, I've never talked about it from Ridel's perspective. He comes across as unlikable, because we've seen firsthand how much his absence hurt both Mark and Kathy. But despite this, I don't believe Ridel is a bad person for what happened. While Ridel's absence was upsetting, he was in no way responsible for what happened to Kathy. Even though he was gone, she still found happiness in a new love interest and her blossoming passions. In fact, it was Mark and Ridel's passion that inspired Kathy to go out and find her own. And while his responses to Mark's anger seem like deflections, I believe that he genuinely did create that short film for Mark and Kathy. There's a scene earlier on in the game where Mark finds a pile of photographs from when he, Kathy, and Ridel went to the mall together. While it initially comes across as a way of showing how close the trio is, Mark tells us that this was the first time Ridel experienced photography, and although he didn't like it at first, it began to grow on him. The fact that the first couple of photos were taken by Kathy and Mark, with the rest being taken by Ridel, show how the reason he warmed up to it could very likely be because he was able to capture moments with his friends. But another aspect of those photos that I've seen nobody talk about is how there's a small ticket stub that comes along with them for the 2012 movie Perks of Being a Wallflower by Steven Chbosky. It's a movie about a 15-year-old boy who ends up befriending two seniors who teach him about love and friendship, all the while he struggles with his own haunting past. Mark, Kathy, and Ridel ended up watching this movie on the same day they went to the mall. And although it is just speculation, there's a high likelihood that this was the movie that started Ridel's passion in filmmaking. He could have very well seen himself in Charlie, the main character of the movie, with Mark and Kathy being those best friends who changed his life. We have no idea about Rydel's family or if he even has parents, so it could be very likely that Mark and Kathy were more important to him than previously thought. Within the very little we see of Rydel's film, one of the shots bears a striking resemblance to a scene at the end of Perks of Being a Wallflower, with two of the characters in the film looking very similar to Mark and Rydel. So despite Rydel's deflections, it's very likely that his short film was made for Mark and Kathy, with him wanting it to be a surprise for when they watched it together. But when Mark tells Rydel that none of it was enough, Rydel realizes that he's right. Even though it wasn't his fault that Kathy had died, he wasn't there for either of his friends. And even though it was a massive opportunity and was done for the people he loved, he couldn't even shoot his friends a text. Ridel Gonzales failed at being there for his friends. His argument with Mark at the end of the game is so realistic, with both sides being understandable. Mark, despite knowing how big of an opportunity this was for Rydel, was angry at him for never being present. It shows that despite Mark understanding why Rydel had to go, he was still hurt by it. He also had no idea about the events that led up to Kathy's death, so as far as he knew, Rydel's absence could have been a part of it. And even though we never saw Rydel's struggles, it's quite clear that he wanted to create a film that showed how much he loved his friends. He was a 15-year-old kid who gained an opportunity that was so big, it overwhelmed his life. His absence was one out of passion and ambition, not one out of hatred or malice. Rydel's failure to be there for his friends is something that I've honestly always feared about myself. With how seriously I've been taking YouTube, I bury myself in the process, and because of that, I have this constant fear that I'm not around enough for my friends, and I fear that saying no to hanging out with my friends means I might lose them. I know it's not really realistic, since even in the game, Mark and Kathy understood why Rydel left, but the balance of passions and relationships is always something that I struggle to maintain. And much like Rydel, if I ever become really popular someday, I'd want to take my friends with me. I'm always trying my hardest to reference them in my videos because they're the ones who inspire me. Although I love creating content for myself, they definitely help fuel my passions as well. What hurts even more is that after Kathy's death, Mark and Rydel stopped being friends, going their separate ways in life. Overall, within Act 1, Rydel as a character shows the audience the need to balance your work and your relationships, and how it's okay that some friends just naturally drift away. Rydel's character was extremely nuanced in Act 1, but Act 2 makes his character even better. After the universe resets at the end of Act 1, Act 2 takes Rydel's character in a vastly different direction. This time around, Rydel is a lot less confident about his short film, and producers, despite showing some interest, haven't given him the green light. This time around, Rydel doesn't know what he wants to say in his film. He keeps changing his mind on what he wants to say, and he's running low on inspiration. Talk about relatable. Rydel's lack of inspiration this time around is symbolized by his profile photo, with the image of him and his camera being replaced. Even the photos that he took of people during the first act are gone. It shows that this time around, Rydel is a lot less confident. Because Rydel is less focused on his short film's production, it gives him time to do other things like schoolwork, meaning that he's able to spend time with Mark and Kathy. As before, he wasn't able to hang out because of exams. Now, while Mark and Kathy's dynamic together is super sweet, a very underrated duo that nobody really talks about is Mark and Rydel. Both of them have always been more driven with their goals and passions than Kathy, with Mark's piano playing and Rydel's filmmaking and photography. In fact, in the previous timeline, Kathy tried to tease Mark with Rydel, telling him about a time she caught Mark miming the piano. But instead of making fun of him too, Rydel tells Kathy that he understands Mark's intentions, admiring his friend's dedication. Because of Mark and Rydel's passions, they're able to confide in one another about how they're feeling, and while waiting for Kathy, the two open up about how they feel stuck in their respective hobbies, like they don't really know why they're doing it anymore. And with how angry they were at each other at the end of Act 1, it's kind of sweet listening to them reassure one another that they'll help each other with their goals. And when Kathy arrives, what was once a sad, bittersweet scene of two friends missing their third turns into a sweet, heartwarming one. And as the three stand in the rain and talk, Ridel begins to snap photos of the two, showing off how sentimental he really is. It supports the idea that Ridel first became interested in photography because of his friends. Later on, we get more conversations between Mark and Ridel on how they feel about their hobbies, specifically about their end goals. Mark tells Ridel that his end goal is to feel close to his mom, and for context, Mark is keeping the news about his mother's death a secret. Ridel tells Mark that he wants to make something he's proud of, he just doesn't know how, which, as a YouTuber, is incredibly relatable. I too want to make something I'm proud of, but it is hard sometimes to pinpoint when I feel like something is good enough. Anyways, as the two friends talk, it's clear that they truly do understand how the other feels when it comes to their interests. After their talk, Mark stays true to his word and helps Ridel with his film, acting with Kathy in order to help Ridel gain more ideas for his movie. After an intense acting session and Mark opening up about his mom, the trio end up more adamant than ever that they'll help each other reach their goals. We then get to the fair, and unlike before where Ridel only had half an hour to spend with his friends, now he truly does have a fun time. But what's interesting is that similarly to what happened before, the thought of the short film is constantly on his mind, putting him into a bit of a slump. But despite this slump, because of the support of his friends, he starts to feel better. The fact that the short film is still on his mind shows how much Ridel wants it, and how much of an accomplishment it must have been to get it previously. In the first act, after Ridel left the fair, Kathy was all alone as Mark spent time with Nicole. But now, because of Ridel's presence, she encourages Mark to hang out with Nicole, while she and Ridel went off to do other stuff. And from the pictures we see later on, it's clear that with Ridel around, the group is full again. Eventually, we then reach the scene of Ridel's big interview with a company known as Kambing Studios, with him being a nervous wreck in the lobby. While Kathy and Mark try to reassure Ridel that he's worked hard on his film pitch, Ridel tells the two that he feels like it's unrefined. But before he can stress about it anymore, he's called to meet with the film executives. And something I absolutely love about this scene is that we get to control Ridel, Mark, and Kathy as they walk through the hall to the meeting room. As they walk through the hallway, we, as an audience, get to see all the different awards the studio has won and all the films they produced. It allows us to understand that this is a big studio, and if Ridel pulls this off, it would be the start of greatness. But then, things get bad. I feel like the decision to not show anything said in the meeting room was heartbreakingly genius. All we see is Mark and Kathy talking to each other about how confident they are in their friend, with Ridel in the background getting more and more nervous as his spirits get more and more crushed. And when he finally leaves the conference room, it's clear that he did not get his funding. Ridel had failed. As the trio wait for the bus, Kathy tells him that it was just one studio in the sea of many, that it was their loss and he'll eventually find the studio for him. But as Kathy tries to cheer him up, Ridel tells her to stop, saying that because he put his heart and soul into his project, he thought it would work, and the fact that his best wasn't enough hurt. He then decides to walk home by himself, needing to be alone with his thoughts. Of course, Ridel's words hit incredibly hard, because imagine something you truly love to do. You put your heart and your soul into it, but despite all this effort, it falls short. It hurts. A lot. We've all heard about how failing can help you learn, but what happens when you feel like you've done as much as you possibly could do and still fail? We saw how much work Ridel was putting in, and seeing him defeated and devastated was painful. But what must hurt even more for Ridel is that it feels like he didn't just let himself down. While Ridel was struggling, Mark and Kathy stood by his side. They went with him to film spots and even acted for him. Ridel most definitely felt like he wasn't only letting himself down, but Mark and Kathy as well. And finally, something that I definitely brushed off before was that Kathy was right. Even though Ridel failed, it was just one of many film studios. Just because this one failed doesn't mean the others would. But what's important is that Ridel didn't need to hear that right now. He was hurting, and even though she was right, he needed time to process his failure before doing anything else. Later on, during Christmas, Mark and Kathy have a brief yet intense argument about Kathy not trusting her friends enough to tell them about her abusive home life. And after they apologize to one another, Ridel appears at the door, apologizing for leaving them at the bus stop, to which the other two say that he didn't need to say sorry. As the trio look over their Christmas feast, Mark and Kathy look upset, and after seeing this, Ridel puts his hands on their shoulders, reassuring the two that everything was going to be okay. And after a fuck you to Kambing Studios, the trio eat, with the last thing we see in the chapter being all the photos they took together. It's one of the most heartwarming scenes in the entire game, and shows us exactly what was missing from Act 1. Ridel was an integral part to Mark and Kathy's lives. He was the more level-headed, logical member of their group, and after seeing everything they've done together, we understand just how badly it hurt when he left. But seeing Ridel's actions now are honestly so inspiring. He worked his ass off with the help of his friends to create something he loved, but even after pouring everything he had into his passions, he ended up failing. And although it hurt like hell and he needed to walk away from his friends, he took the time to process what happened and came back. And although he was still definitely hurt by his failure, he got back to work. Later on, while Kathy told the duo about her abusive home life, Ridel ended up getting a message confirming that a production studio had granted him the funding he needed. And when he tells his friends, their look of absolute adoration that he finally got what he always wanted is so heartwarming. This time around, because of Mark and Kathy's direct help, Ridel decides to make Kathy the lead actress in his short film, allowing her to explore her passions without the fear of being left behind motivating her. Later on, we get to the school's prom, with the theme being Greek mythology, with each character's outfit being symbolic. Now, I've explained Mark, Nicole, and Kathy's in a previous video, but Ridel's is a very interesting one. While I'm not sure he's any specific deity, he's donning half of the comedy mask. In Greek mythology, there's a comedy mask and a tragedy mask, which are both used in Greek theater. The fact that Ridel's wearing the comedy mask obviously shows off his skills in film and theater, but it could also represent the shift in Act 1 Ridel and Act 2 Ridel, with him sticking around this time being the happy version. It could also represent Thalia, the Greek muse who the comedy mask was based on, whose name means flourishing or to thrive, showing how far Ridel has come. Sadly, despite Ridel's presence this time around, Kathy ends up dying once again, this time disappearing right in front of Mark's eyes. After this, Mark and Ridel once again watch the film Ridel created, but this time around, Ridel's the one who gets angry first. He tells Mark that Kathy should have been there to see the movie with them, begging Mark to tell him what happened. But because of how supernatural it sounded, Mark was unable to explain to Ridel how Kathy vanished, afraid that by telling Ridel, he'll just make him angrier. Mark, the one that Ridel could confide in most about his problems, couldn't open up to him about what happened. He then tells Mark that without Kathy, this whole stupid film was for nothing. After pouring his heart and soul for months into it, after all the failures and hiccups, it was nothing if he couldn't experience it with Kathy. This time around, instead of making a film for Mark and Kathy, he made a film with Mark and Kathy. But with Mark unable to answer his question, Ridel leaves, and once again, their relationship breaks. In this act, Ridel's a present and reliable friend. We see firsthand just how hard he works to achieve his goals and passions, and we empathize with his failures. But in all honesty, Ridel handles failure perfectly. When you try your absolute hardest at something you love and fail, it's going to hurt. There's no doubt about it. But it's okay to let it hurt. It's okay to let it sink over you and experience it. But as soon as that's done, you get back up and try again. Ridel truly loved his hobby, and just because he failed doesn't mean he was down forever. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the final part of Ridel Gonzales' journey. After the universe resets one final time, we are then transported to the main universe, the timeline where Mark and Nicole never meet. In this universe, Kathy ends up going missing, and the first person who ends up looking for her is Ridel. While Mark is reeling over the death of his mother, Ridel desperately yells at Mark that they need to find Kathy. Unlike in the first act, where Ridel couldn't be there for both of his friends, this time around, Ridel is the first to take action. And once the two find Kathy and she confides in them, the trio share a group hug and continue to be present within each other's lives, not just as friends, but as a family. In this universe, Ridel ends up failing yet again at gaining funding for his project. I absolutely adore the photo they chose to show Ridel's failure. I love his sad, defeated expression as he's shrouded in darkness, as Mark and Kathy stand behind him covered in light. It shows that despite his failure, his friends will always have his back. And as time goes on, he continues to try, and ends up securing his funding. And as the trio grow up, Ridel ends up becoming a famous director, and all three friends continue to be in each other's lives. Until then's Ridel Gonzales is a character that I feel best represents failure, but despite this, I do not believe Ridel is a failure. Yes, he does mess up. He falls short of where he wants to be, but despite this, he ends up bouncing back and succeeding, even if it's something that happens across different timelines. But his two biggest failures are things that we as people can learn from. I know that we can't always be there for our closest friends, and we have to live our own lives, but it's not a bad idea to check in from time to time, ask them how they're doing. And when it comes to failure in our passions, I feel like there are a lot of people who don't try putting in effort because they're afraid of failure. By putting in 100% and still failing, it feels like you've tried your absolute hardest and still come up short. Like you hit your peak and still failed. And it hurts. It's something I experience all the time. After getting a 44 out of 72 on one of my midterms, I decided to dedicate 3 hours a day for 3 weeks before the final exam studying. And after all that hard work, I ended up with a 42 out of 72. Yeah, that one stung. But despite how bad I felt afterward, I knew that it was okay. You tried your absolute best and failed, but you can always try again. Maybe try a new approach. If I failed the class, I'll just take it again. It's okay to feel bad after you don't succeed, but as long as you don't stay down forever, you're going to be okay. Heck, as a YouTuber, I can't tell you how many times I've created something I put so much effort into, only for it to flop. But that's okay. If I let failure keep me down, I wouldn't still be a YouTuber. I love what I do, and if you love what you do, don't let failure keep you down. Don't be afraid of taking risks. To quote my favorite line in the show Community, that thing some men call failure, I call living. Breakfast. And I'm not leaving until I clear out the buffet. Ridel Gonzales is a character that shows us how failure isn't the end of the world, along with showing us the importance of balancing your passions and your friendships. Don't let failure keep you down forever. And even if you're hurting, you'll still have friends who'll stand by your side. Always remember, the world hasn't ended yet. My name is Kustopia, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all sometime soon.